Hi, welcome to this month's video, and we're gonna continue to talk about Schelling's transcendental system of transcendental idealism. Last week, we covered the principle of his philosophy, which is the proposition that self equals self. This principle is generated from the action of self reflecting on itself, making it at the same time a synthetic and an identical knowledge. This basically means that anything we gain from reflecting on ourselves is unconditioned knowledge, which means that you don't need anything else to prove that these are true thoughts, like true informations about ourselves. So after the principle, it leads us to a question of how is it possible that we can have any knowledge, real knowledge from the outside world, since we can only be sure about anything about ourselves through self-consciousness. So how can we know anything besides ourselves? Schelling approaches this question by starting with the activity of self reflecting on itself. We can see that in this activity there are two parts. There's an action reflects, and there's a subjective self, which is reflecting upon the object, which is also a self. The key attribute of the subjective self is that it is a free, unlimited subjective, which means that it has a quality of constantly expanding forever. So if I have to draw it in a graph, we can see this point is our subjective. They were constantly, if you can see the line with the arrow, it's constantly reaching to the outside world, right? But purely reaching out does not create any knowledge, because apparently we are not God, so we can't know about everything, and we can't have the knowledge of the entire world or anything any godlike knowledge. So in order for us to have some knowledge, the self, by reflecting on itself, sets a boundary, a limit to the extent that our subjective self can reach, which is, if you can see this graph more clearly, the circle right here. The circle is basically the objective part of ourself in the preposition that, not in the action that self reflect on itself. The quality of the objective self is that it's a limited self. It limits the range that our subjective can go to. And there's a paradox here after this general deduction. Schelling continued to explain that the limitation and the unlimitedness and the limit they kind of need each other to exist and produce a knowledge. Because if you really think about it, if you don't have the boundary, the subjective is just gonna keep going, keep shooting. It's like shooting flashlights. It's never gonna come back to us. So we can't have any knowledge about anything, because the self will just keep going forward. So we need to build a wall to kind of bounce back the infinite overreaching activity. And also for the boundary, the objective self, it also needs the subjective for its own existence. For example, if you just have a boundary there without a subjective constantly like shooting out the like, as you can see in this graph, without the self constantly shooting towards the outside, imagine if it never reaches the boundary. So what's the point of having a boundary? So what's the like, why does it exist? Then we have a paradox, because we found ourselves in a situation that the self is unlimited and limited at the same time. So how's that possible? Schelling's solution is that we can, as I just explained, the unlimitedness and limitedness needs each other to simply exist. So in this situation, they basically build the foundation to each other. So you don't need anything else to like prove that happened. You only need the concept of limited, the quality of the limited self and the quality of the unlimited self, which presupposes each other and builds, reciprocally supports each other's existence. So you don't need anything else. It's kind of like a dialectical paradox, but it's solved by this reciprocally mutual foundation. As you can see in this system of how self-consciousness work, these arrows are basically what creates the real knowledge, is like the knowledge of what we think the laws of science are. It is produced by the process of these arrows crashing these boundaries and creating new ones. Through this process, we have the real knowledge. We can think about it practically to better understand this. These boundaries are basically the laws of science. You can basically think like when Newton wrote his laws of physics, those laws are basically the boundaries of our knowledge. We think those are like the reality. We can't go past that. But after Einstein published his works and all these like people after Newton, the new like the physicists with their new theories, their revolutionary scientific theories, what they're basically doing is just breaking the old boundaries and building new ones that we like right now we think we can't get past that, but in the future as science develop, the boundaries keep like breaking and infinitely we are gonna have new laws of science, and like it's a constant process striving towards infinity. So these real scientific knowledge are the knowledge of realism. As we can see in this system of self-consciousness, these scientific knowledges are basically created by these arrows crashing the boundary and creating new ones. Schelling categorized all of these knowledge about the reality, but in fact it's not actually reality. You're just creating boundaries for yourself, so you think it's real. So Schelling categorized all of these knowledge into practical knowledge. And there's another type of knowledge, which is the ideal knowledge. The ideal knowledge is produced by us reflecting on this entire system. That brings us to theoretical philosophy, which is the study of how our consciousness works, how including like what we are doing right now. This is part of this ideal knowledge that kind of goes back to ourselves and reflect on the entire system instead of just some like questions about the reality, which is, as we just found out, which is really limited.